Welcome to Boards and Gear, board operations. In this segment, we are going to talk about how to run a board. So Nancy, can you tell us why that's important?
Well, yeah, when a board runs effectively, it makes better decisions, and it's better able to achieve its mission.
Okay, now, so let's go to our experts so we can hear how to run a board.
Hi, I'm Laura Pierce. I'm a Seattle-based nonprofit management consultant. I'm here today with Nancy Long. She's the Executive Director of 501 Commons. And we're here to talk about board operations, how to make your board meetings and the way you work together as effective as possible. Nancy, can you start us off by talking a little bit about how to organize an effective board meeting?
A board meeting should really have three parts to it. One part is looking back at what has just recently happened in the organization. So some of the things that fit into that component are looking at financial statements from the most recent period, having a conversation about a board ED report, or the report from the volunteer who's in charge of most of the management of the organization. There may be things that the board members have questions about or want to talk about in that report. And anything that sort of is looking back is one part of a board meeting. The other part is looking at what's going on right now and kind of the immediate future. So that might be sharing plans with something important that's coming up in the organization, or it might be the board planning what it needs to do next in support of the organization. And the third really important part is the looking way out into the future. It's the strategic part of the board's role and responsibility to think about the future of the organization. Too often boards get bogged down in looking back and thinking about sort of the immediate things that are going on, and we don't quite get the time on our agendas to be thinking about that longer term piece of the organization. There are a couple tools that a board can use to help make sure that that board meeting is well balanced. One is by having an agenda that's planned in advance and agreed to in advance and sent out so people know what to expect the conversation will be about in the board meeting, and board members have some input into setting that agenda. And I think it's always helpful if you not only put what's on the agenda, but you clarify if it's a decision that's going to be made or it's just a conversation, and who's in charge of that part of the agenda. It can also be helpful to use a consent agenda. And Laura, do you want to talk a little bit about how you've seen consent agendas work to help boards have effective meetings?
Yeah, definitely. A consent agenda takes a number of things that are on the board agenda and may be more routine in nature or just need to be taken care of, but there's not a lot of discussion or action required. So a couple of examples, maybe you need a new check signer on your bank account and the board needs to approve that, but there's no discussion needed. Or approving the past board minutes is a great example. I've seen boards spend 15 valuable minutes of their board meeting just looking at the minutes from the last agenda. Get them out in advance and put it on the consent agenda. So it's basically a slate of things get voted on together at the beginning of the meeting. And it helps you shift your attention from that debriefing of what's past and can't be changed to more of a focus on the future for the organization. So it's a great tool.
Laura, you've also done a lot of planning with boards and helped boards do that thinking out into the future. Can you talk a little bit about how boards can make sure that a part of every agenda and a part of the board's work is focused on that longer term?
Yeah, I think both things are true. I think you should spend time at every board meeting, and I also think there are times when you have to make a special effort to do a strategic planning process that will take extra time and take retreat time as well. The idea here is you have a mission and your whole focus as an organization should be on delivering on that mission. And in order to do that, you need to think deeply about what activities, what are some goals that you could set that will help you move toward achievement of that mission and your vision for the future. So the board really should take the lead on setting those goals, those strategic priorities for the organization. And then the staff takes the lead in implementation and getting those things done, often with support and involvement from the board as well. So the board has to take the lead. The board has to be involved in visioning out into the future for the organization so that everyone is moving toward a common goal. There'll be a lot more momentum if there's kind of unity of purpose behind a few priorities for the organization.
You know, sometimes I think people get intimidated by the idea of evaluation. Just the word can seem intimidating and feel like it's something that's beyond what we can do in most nonprofit organizations. So I often ask people to just tell me what are the things they worry about. What do they wake up in the night thinking about and worrying about? And what are the things that they watch in their own organization to try to figure out whether the organization is on track or not? Because many times those are the tools of evaluation that are just in our environment, and we don't think of them that way. But, you know, are people coming in the door? Are they happy when they leave? Do they get what they need? Is staff feeling burnt out? Is the organization getting support from individuals in the community that it serves? Those are all parts of evaluation, but they're just the sea that we swim in on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes I think if we make it a little less fancy, people are more excited about having that conversation and kind of looking back. In terms of looking forward, I think one of the things that can be challenging for a board is just how much there is to do, and all the things that you've just talked about. That's a pretty full plate. And it can be helpful if the board organizes itself into having some board committees that are doing some of that board work. And it's important that the board committees aren't doing staff work, they're doing board work. So they're helping the board with strategic planning, or with that look back at reviewing finances, looking at organizational goal setting, and helping the organization really be ready to use those board meetings really well, because some of that work has been done by the committee. Can you say anything about board committees, tools that you think have been particularly useful for board committees?
Yeah, I think the most important thing with board committees is that they have a really clear purpose. And really the board should set that when they establish a committee. But it can be helpful even to have a written charter for the committee where you document, this is our purpose, these are our goals for the coming year, and how we're going to work together. And it's invaluable to have committees, because if you try to do everything as a committee of the whole board, it would be so inefficient and it would just be so time consuming. So the committees allow a smaller group to dive a little bit deeper. You can also have non-board members on the committees. You're not limited to just board membership. It is good to have board linkage, and then you can have additional expertise that you bring in to serve on that particular committee. And it's also a great pipeline for new board members potentially coming on. So I love that. I think I would caution small organizations to really limit the number of committees that you field. I've actually met organizations where they had more committees than board members. And so it was really just rotating chairs, and the same people were on the finance committee and they met the next night for the membership committee. And that's not very efficient. If you're really small, I would say consider two committees, one that has more of an external focus, maybe marketing, fundraising, and one that has more of an internal operations focus, finance and issues like that. That's one way to divide it up that makes for smaller committees.
I think a board development committee is also a very helpful tool, because it's sort of the caretaker for the board. It's the sort of the board's mom is that committee. And that committee is helping make sure that the board is bringing on new board members and thinking about what kinds of skills and backgrounds and connections to the community that you need from those board members, helping the board do a self-evaluation, hopefully on an annual basis, where the board, at least in a conversation, if not in some kind of a survey that the board prepares itself, is thinking about how's the board working? Do we feel like we're getting the right work done? Are our conversations interesting conversations? Do we like coming to board meetings? And does everybody feel involved and engaged? One of the challenges I think that boards experience also is trying to find a line between the role of the board and the role of the executive. And that can get cloudy with if committees are involved more in management operations. And it can be pretty cloudy just for most organizations. It can be a little bit difficult to find. I think an easy way to think about that is if the board is really thinking about what the organization is trying to accomplish and helping the organization accomplish that and providing oversight to make sure that the organization is getting that goal achieved, The staff is really all about the how that happens. What are the means that they're going to be used? And that staff could be volunteers or paid staff. It really doesn't matter. When you're doing planning with organizations, how do you introduce that idea of thinking about what would happen if there's a turnover in key staff or a key volunteer position or turnover in the board chair?
Well, you know, people do come and go from organizations, and it's good to always be thinking ahead about that. Sometimes it's a difficult conversation to broach if you have a founder that's been around a long time or there hasn't been a lot of turnover in the board, but I always encourage people that new blood, new perspectives are really valuable. And, you know, there are a couple things you can do to help set the new people that come into the organization up for success. One of the things is just documenting how you do things. A lot of times people have, especially board practices, you know, what time of year do they do particular things? It's in their heads and it's not written down. So beginning to just create a board guidebook. Sometimes they're formal policies and sometimes they're more just written practices. This is how we've typically done this. Here's a calendar of how the board year unfolds. I think that's really helpful. The other thing I would really want to communicate about leadership succession is you really need to appreciate people. And when there is transition, try to really celebrate the outgoing person and all that they've done, and also be very welcoming of the new person and orient them and give them the tools that they need to succeed. Those kind of smoothing the transitions by thinking about the people involved is really critical as well. Yeah, too often new board members don't get an orientation, and it takes them 3 months, 6 months to even just observe and figure out how the organization operates. So if you can give them the basics of how to read those financial statements, you know, a big one is how do decisions really get made at this organization? Some boards have very formal voting procedures, others it's much more by consensus. But it's important to be as transparent as possible about how you make decisions. That's an example of a practice that should be documented. Usually there's some information in the bylaws, but that may or may not actually reflect fully what the practice is in the organization.
Okay, so that is the long and short of board operations. So what would be the next step?
Well, there's some key tools that you might think about. Your meeting agenda, board job descriptions, committee descriptions, and a strategic plan. There's some next steps that you might consider, like look at your meeting agendas. How much time is spent on the past versus the future? Gauge whether your board meets too frequently or too infrequently to get its work done. How are committees playing into this? Talk about the relationship between board and staff, what's working and what's not.
That is our video on board operations. You have a lot of work ahead of you. You can do it. Go out there and get them.